Welcome back, friends, to Sleepy History Tales, where the past is never really gone. It doesn't just vanish, it lingers just beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to brush away the dirt. Every night, we pull another thread loose from history's shroud. The forgotten, the covered up. The unspeakable truths that once sat quietly in the corners of everyday life. What you're about to hear isn't just a piece of folklore. It's not just another strange Appalachian ghost story. It's a warning. Tonight, we open the decaying door on the macabre history of the Elbridge family, a legacy stitched together with silence, ritual, and blood. Echoes that still drift through the hollows of Appalachia, if you know where to listen. Old land surveys from the early 1900s still mark their property, a crooked square carved high in the mountains, balanced between Jackson County, Kentucky, and the Virginia border. But if you try to follow that trail today, you'll find nothing but the forest's reclamation bricks scattered like loose teeth. A foundation collapsed beneath tangled roots. It's as if the land wanted to bury it again. And maybe it should have stayed that way. The earliest signs that something was wrong in the Elbridge line don't come from court records or police files. They come from quieter places, a faded church ledger, sealed birth certificates, and the 1869 census written in pencil. So faint it's nearly invisible. It lists the original head of household as Jonah Elbridge, age 38, farmer. His wife Mary, age 17. Under children, just one word expected. But things curdle quickly. By the 1880 census, Jonah was gone. Mary remained now the head mistress of the home. The real chill comes in the roll call beneath her name: 7 children, all carrying the Elbridge surname, no other adults, and under relation to head of house, for each child unknown. The doctor who signed Jonah Elbridge's death certificate officially wrote natural causes. Yet decades later, when his private journal surfaced in a dusty historical archive, a very different picture emerged. There was nothing natural about what I saw in that house. He died with his eyes wide open, pupils pinned, his mouth packed with wax. Mary refused to bury him until the 3rd day, said she was waiting for a sign. By 1895, railroad surveyors crossed the ridge, and one of them left a chilling note in his field book, now preserved in a museum basement in Corbin. Avoid Elbridge Ridge. There's singing from the trees some nights, no language I know. They say it's just the girls practicing hymns. I don't think so. From that point, the Elbridge name flits in and out of history like a shadow gone from official records, yet always nearby when something went wrong. Dead livestock, sealed wells, children visiting who never returned, but no one dared accuse them openly. Even in letters to state officials, they were simply them folks up the ridge. Then came 1901. 3 men clearing brush near the ruins stumbled upon something that made even old-timers drop their voices to a whisper. A white dress, still immaculate, draped over a wooden frame. The bodice stuffed with hair. The sleeves stitched shut. Inside the chest, cavity embroidered in red thread. The bride returns when the sun is ready. Before we move deeper into the story, before the truly unspeakable parts, I want to pause and ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Is it daylight where you are? Or is the night already leaning in through your window? If you're new here, this isn't your typical history channel. We don't shy away from the darkness. We walk straight into it. So if you've made it this far, you might be one of us. Someone who knows the past is not just dusty books and sepia photographs, but something alive, something with teeth. Join our circle of mystery seekers, subscribe and tell me in the comments. Would you dare to hear a story like this if it happened in your own county? Her name was Martha Caldwell, and in 1904, she became one of the last documented government visitors to walk away from the Elbridge property alive. Martha wasn't a reporter, and she certainly wasn't a thrill seeker. She was a traveling field nurse working under the newly passed Public Welfare Mothers Act, checking on births, infant health, and home conditions in rural Kentucky. Her trip to Elbridge Hollow was supposed to be routine, just another spring inspection. But the ledger she kept tells a different story, found decades later in the attic of a government storage barn. Her entry for April 14, 1904 begins in neat cursive. Arrived at Ridge by foot. Air close. Forest quiet. Too quiet. No sound but my shoes on dry soil. House visible from path. Structure crooked. Roof sagged. Smells of turpentine and elder root. She knocked. A girl answered, no older than 12. Barefoot, wearing a long dress, thin as paper. Martha wrote, child would not speak, eyes glassy, not unkind, just watching. The girl turned and walked away without a word. Martha followed her inside. It was dark. Every window covered in bundles of dried plants, tied with animal sinew. The air thick with pine wax, and something else like iron. Multiple girls inside, she wrote. All look alike, no male voices. One older woman in chair, maybe matriarch. Face painted white, said nothing, just hummed. A pot, boiling on the hearth, smelled of something with teeth. In every corner mirrors, all turned to face the walls. She was offered tea. She refused. One room held what they told her was a newborn. But the swaddled form was motionless, skin grey. Told the infant was born of blood, froze me. Girl holding it smiled, missing all her front teeth. Martha left quickly. But at the bottom of the page in darker ink and a shaky hand, she added, this is not a family. This is a vault. Something is kept here. Those were the last words Martha Caldwell ever wrote in her ledger. 2 days later, she walked back into her district station, filed her report, and then refused to ever take another assignment up the ridge. From that day forward, Martha never again left her hometown. Neighbors said she changed after that visit. Skin pale voice, quiet eyes always fixed on something behind you rather than at you. She died in 1911 at just 36 years old. Her death certificate carries a curious line in the doctor's hand, exhaustion of unknown origin. No other public health officer would ever be assigned to Elbridge Ridge again. But the story didn't sink with Martha's grave. 5 years later, a group of boys were hunting near the ridge. That's when they saw them, a line of girls dressed in white, standing perfectly still among the trees, not moving, not speaking, just watching. The boys bolted in fear, crashing through the undergrowth. One tripped. When he looked back, the girls were gone, but the dirt where they had stood wasn't empty. A single human tooth lay there, smooth, still warm to the touch. By 1919, the whispers about Elbridge Ridge finally reached the county courthouse in Whitley County, Kentucky. The ridge had been avoided for decades, sure. But now, 2 children were missing. Samuel Auburn, age 9. Betty Jo Clemens, age 7. Cousins. They'd been out foraging in the woods after church. Their trail led toward the Elbridge boundary, across a dry creek into a pine thicket. And then it vanished. No footprints, no torn cloth, no signs of a struggle. Just Betty Jo's bonnet caught in a thorn bush. The fabric inside was damp, but not from rain. That was enough for Deputy Franklin Harker, a war veteran with a limp, a temper, and a memory of what his grandmother once told him about the Elbridges. That ridge is where God left off. And something else took over. Harker filed for a rare legal petition, forced inspection of a private homestead on suspicion of abduction and unlawful burial. The judge signed it. No sheriff volunteered to go, so Harker rode up the ridge himself, bringing 2 civilian men, dogs and shovels. The sealed report of what they found was nearly lost in a courthouse fire decades later. But part of it survived. It reads, "House unoccupied at time of entry. Doors unlatched. Food on table still warm. Numerous hand-carved dolls found in upstairs room. Faces resembling real people. One bow-stitched name, Betty Jo. No living persons found. No adult bodies. Cellar door concealed beneath hearth. Significant odor of rotten metal. Inside cellar, 11 wooden crates containing layered fabric root bundles and preserved human remains. Includes infants, juveniles, and 1 adult female. State of preservation unclear. Eyes all open. The next year, the Elbridge name was struck from the census. On paper, they had migrated to unknown territories. But no migration documents, no ticket stubs, no sale deeds exist. The house was boarded up, the path blocked with barbed wire. Yet, locals swore the ridge still hummed at night, a low, steady sound like bees trapped behind a wall. And once a year, in the second week of October, someone hung 3 black feathers from the church door, bound in pine knot. No note, no one seen. When asked, the pastor would only say, "It's their way of reminding us." The Elbridges never left. They just sank deeper. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1937, a man stumbled out of the tree line behind the Pine Knot General Store, barefoot, bloody. A length of barbed wire twisted around one arm. His name was Arlen Buckner, a moonshiner drifter and occasional bootleg hauler. But that morning, he was almost unrecognizable, filthy, trembling, missing several fingernails. The only words he could repeat were, "She watches. She watches." Even from the dirt. At first, folks thought he'd had a still accident, maybe a bad run of liquor. But the doctors at Whitley Infirmary found no burns, no alcohol in his system. Instead, they found deliberate cuts along his forearms, old scars, and a fresh carving on his back. Not a burn brand. A symbol cut into the flesh. 3 interlocked triangles. No one recognized it except Miss Edith Mays, the town's oldest resident and postmistress. She hadn't spoken the Elbridge name in years. But when she saw the mark, her face turned the color of ash. "That's theirs," she whispered. "The mark they gave to boys they kept." Arlen was committed to the state hospital in Danville after several violent episodes, screaming fits triggered by the smell of fresh bread or the creak of wood. Nurses kept him sedated most of the time. But one night, when the drugs wore off too soon, he wrote something on his cell wall in his own blood. "Do not bury the dead." That same week, a curious social worker tried to trace his steps. She found only a rumor that Arlen had been carrying an old family land deed, not a road map, dated 1881, signed by Virgil Elbridge. The deed was never found, but months later, 2 graves near Black Hollow were dug up. Both were empty. Before we turn the page to what happened next, I want to hear from you. Right now, as you're listening, is it quiet where you are? Or is there a sound in the background you can't quite place? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are hearing this in silence, and how many aren't really alone right now. Believe it or not, even when people thought the Elbridge name had disappeared from Kentucky, there were signs that they had never left. In her final appearance before her death, Edith, the former postmaster, told the congregation, "There are bloods that never cease. They just dry up, waiting for the right mouth to drink again." Arlen Buckner, who once shouted, "She watches, even from the ground," died in 1943. His body was cremated, but not before mortuary staff discovered something chilling. The area of his back where the 3 interlocking triangles had been carved had healed, but the mark was still visible under his skin as if it were growing inside. And then, a new clue emerged. In the spring of 1954, Pine Knot's only barber, Frankie Bell, found a small package hidden in the chimney of the rented room at the back of the shop. Inside a stained canvas bag, a rusty harmonica, and a yellowed letter signed E. The handwriting was frantic and shaky. "I write these words with the remains of my fingers. The rest she took. She said, I don't need them in the next life, just my eyes, to keep watch." Who she was unclear. But the postscript sent a chill down Frankie's spine. "I buried Mama 4 times. She never rested." The letter disappeared from the police records overnight. Nothing remained but Frankie's memories and the photograph he took as evidence. The sheriff who handled the case, Dale Cormick, resigned 2 months later and left Kentucky, disappearing into Ohio, living as a vagrant outside a church gate. That same year, 2 boys playing by the Cumberland River found an old Elbridge locket, not containing a photo, but a lock of shiny, freshly cut black hair. The coroner noted privately, "If this hair is as old as the locket, then something or someone is keeping it fresh." By 1957, the rumors were back, this time with sightings. On the slopes of Pine Knot, several hikers reported seeing a tall, barefoot, grey-clad woman standing motionless among the trees, her eyes never looking at them, but looking beyond as if waiting for something. In town, the pastor, Albie Wren, began warning his parishioners, "Not all graves are at rest. There are families who seek to force the spirit to stay in the ground if it satisfies their hunger." He was fired, declared insane. A month later, he was found sitting in the middle of 92nd Street, naked, clutching a human jaw, his own blood smeared across his chest in a triangle. In 1963, newly minted Deputy Clara Wills, who didn't believe in ghosts, took over patrolling Pine Knot. One night, she was called to investigate screams coming from beneath the abandoned Old Oak Church, a place that had been funded by the Elbridges but had been closed after a boy was hanged by someone who didn't know how. Under the rotten wooden floor, Clara found a hollowed-out space that looked like a bunker. Inside was a skinny girl with matted hair and a mouth sewn shut. As Clara approached, she dug into the dirt next to her, revealing a worn ragdoll and a stained Bible, each page bearing Elbridge's name in red ink. On her wrist was a tattoo of 3 triangles burned into the wood above her bed. She breathes through the roots. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. Every time the lights went out, her heart rate monitor spiked. Her pupils dilated almost like a cat's. A few days later, black cars without license plates arrived, taking her away with sealed records. Clara protested, was fired, and never heard from again. Years later, before she died, Clara left a recorded message. She's not hiding. She's guarding something. And then the story cuts to 1969, when a demolition crew prepared to dismantle the old Elbridge well and found its bricks, pulsing like the pulse of a living creature. Where are you watching from? Is it morning, noon, or night where you are? Can you imagine yourself standing in front of that still beating? Well, if you are following along right now, stop for a moment and tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it there? Because here in the dead of night, we are about to touch a secret that has been hidden for more than a century. The name Mother Root. It sounds like an ancient whisper, like an underground vein running through time. In the broken books, the scattered scraps of paper from the 17th to the 19th centuries, the name keeps repeating each time, associated with a family, a child, or a strange event. And then, in the files that Dr. Lyall Ransom found among hundreds of pages yellowed by time, he came across a sentence copied over and over like a ritual. The blood of Elbridge, when the moon covers the sun, returns to where the mother root rises. It sounds like a prophecy, but when placed next to the list of disappearances, it looks like a date with fate. Lyall Ransom believes that Mother Root is more than just a vague belief. It is a network of secret rituals linked to the Elbridge family, quietly existing for generations. And each time it appears, it leaves a chilling mark on history. And now, I have to ask you, if one day you discovered that your family had a mysterious story that had been repeated for hundreds of years, would you seek the truth or let it lie dormant? Remember what Dr. Lyall Ransom once said? The one who bears the mark must return to feed his mother. According to him, the mark was not a tattoo or a birthmark, but rather an unusual manifestation from birth. Black teeth, grey eyes, deformed bones, or unusually early speech. In many other regions, such children would be considered cursed, but in local custom, they were considered chosen and ultimately sacrificed. Ransom also found burial records from 1849, which clearly show that many of the Elbridge babies were buried with their umbilical cords still attached, a peculiar detail that only appears in ancient blood sacrifice fertility rites around the world. One record even contained just a few words: born breathing, buried, convulsing. The Elbridge women, Ransom argues, were not victims, but rather preservers of an ancient ritual passed down through generations, through memory isolation and ritual books like the Vessel's Ledger. But after publishing his research, he was ridiculed by academics, lost all his funding, and had to leave the university. In 1982, he disappeared from his Elbridge mobile home. When people came looking for him, all they found was a garland of dried vines filled with baby teeth and a note pinned to the door. "She's still hungry. It's easy to dismiss the Elbridge tragedy as just the harsh realities of Appalachian life: poor medical care, difficult childbirths, high mortality rates. But in 1983, medical records from the state archives painted a terrifying pattern. 5 generations of miscarriages, birth defects, and abnormal births, all performed by a mysterious group of 4 midwives. None of them had licenses. None of them worked in hospitals, and they delivered only Elbridge women. After each birth where the child disappeared, they withdrew, disappeared from the profession. Their notes were chillingly cold. The child is not to be kept, or tonight the roots will drink deeply. Not a single Elbridge boy had lived past the age of 7 in more than a century. They were not in cemeteries, not on census records. They were gone as if someone had led them across the boundary of this world. Then, in the summer of 1984, a strange lightning storm ignited a wildfire in McCreary County. The fire raged everywhere until it hit the Elbridge's old orchard and stopped abruptly. The people who came to put it out said it smelled not of burning wood or dry leaves, but sweet, rotten, and rotting flesh. When the dust settled, what emerged changed the community forever. Beneath the soil were rows of small, regular graves, dozens of infant and child remains, some with cloth still clinging to their bones, some with metal tags. Forensic examinations identified more than 40 cases between 1880 and 1975, many of them caused by intentional trauma. Broken sternums, dislocated spines, even a skeleton nailed to a wooden box buried upright. And that wasn't the worst of it. Botanists analyzing the land after the fire made a chilling discovery. By the way, are you watching this during the day or night? What's it like where you are right now? Windy, rainy, or eerily still? The soil where the Elbridge orchard once stood was saturated with calcium and iron, clear traces of decaying blood and bone marrow. Botanists confirmed that no tree would ever take root there again unless treated with powerful chemicals. The land was dead. The orchard had been planted by Mary Beth Elbridge herself in 1867, and only Elbridge women were allowed to pick its fruit: pears, apples, cherries, all renowned for their sweetness, but all perished in the fire. A photograph taken by a volunteer firefighter, now locked away in an archive, shows 3 charred trees still standing in the middle of the orchard. At the base of one, inside its hollow core, were scorched words, "Womb root return." No tools were found, no footprints were found, and no one could explain how the words had been carved into the inside of the tree. People stopped asking. By 1985, Lenora Elbridge was the last woman alive with that name. Only 43, but her face and body looked as if they had been through 70 winters. She rarely went outside, never picked up the phone. When social workers visited after the fire, they found Lenora sitting in a rocking chair, softly reciting lullabies to the empty space in front of her. But behind the devastation, there was something else, a locked room that no one, not even the authorities, was allowed to enter. Neighbors said that every time a storm came, the sound of a baby crying could be heard from the house. A man once knocked on the door in the middle of a heavy rainstorm to help and heard the baby cry, "Don't make her cut you off again." But Lenora lived alone. No birth certificate, no adoption papers, no one had ever seen a child come or go. Finally, a search warrant was issued. And what was inside the room? No one could forget. A boy of about 8, malnourished, mute, his body covered in ritual scars. He had an unhealed cleft palate, a fused arm, and round burn marks like a brand. He sat in a hand-carved wooden crib, too small for his age, surrounded by bundles of dried herbs and pinned rag dolls. On the wall, red writing read, "He lives because she sinned. He was born under the wrong moon," Lenora admitted. "I tried to fix him. Mother said, 'We don't bury bad ones anymore. Keep them close.'" He listens better now. She believed he was the reincarnation of her older brother, who had drowned under the stars in 1950. Lenora was declared mentally incompetent. The child was placed in foster care and named James. James never spoke, never smiled, just stared silently at the trees as if he were listening to them. One full moon night, he carved 3 words into his pillow with his fingernails: Lenora Elbridge, return. In 1986, when Lenora was committed to a mental asylum, the Elbridge house was cleaned out. In a chest with a false bottom, Mary Beth Elbridge's cowhide-bound diary was found dated October 3rd, 1871. Not a regular diary, but a notebook of rituals, births, and punishments. At first it was just a strange line. "My son was feverish. I put sheep's ashes under his tongue and tied his hands. If he died, I would bury him under a tree." But as the text progressed, it became darker. The 7th child was born under the red moon. His eyes were closed and he breathed backward. "I will keep him until you come back." From then on, the word preserve appeared repeatedly. Some children were not buried, but crudely embalmed with herbs wine and an unknown ingredient. The skin was still soft, the hair had not fallen out. For decades, each wooden box had a name and a single word engraved on it: offered. Dig deeper under the main house, and the investigation team discovered a hidden cellar that had been hidden for more than a century, locked with a rusty iron bar and a thick layer of wax. When they pried it open, a cold air and a foul smell rushed out, causing an officer to vomit on the spot. Below was a stone room, dirt floor, no light. Are you watching this at night or during the day? If it's night and windy outside, try looking out the window. Can you see the shadow of a tree? Friends, have you ever heard of a piece of land where even the grass refuses to grow? Imagine a place so still that just stepping foot in it makes your breath catch. Where are you watching from? Is it daytime or already dark? Is there any wind tonight? That piece of land is the Elbridge orchard, planted in 1867 by Mary Beth Elbridge. For more than a century, only the women of the house had been allowed to pick the fruit, the sweet pears, apples, and cherries. But after a fire in 1984, all the trees died. The soil was contaminated with calcium and iron signs of blood and marrow that had seeped into every fiber. Scientists say that without heavy chemical treatment, nothing will grow there again. A volunteer firefighter's photo shows 3 charred trees still standing, and inside the hollow of one not on the outside are the words womb, root, return. How they were carved into the tree's trunk is unknown. And then, all questions are left unanswered. In 1985, only one woman, the Elbridge woman, Lenora, 43, but looking to be in her 70s, remained alive. She did not leave. Her house did not answer her phone. Neighbors sometimes heard children crying in storms, always storms, though Lenora lived alone. Once, someone knocked on the door and heard a child's voice pleading, "Don't make her cut me again." When the police searched, they found a locked room. Inside, a boy of about 8, thin mute, covered in ritual scars, his arm partially fused burns like a brand. He sat in a crib that was too small, surrounded by pinned rag dolls. On the wall, he lives because she sinned. Lenora claimed that he had been born under the wrong moon, and instead of bearing him, she kept him to be more obedient. The boy was given a new name, James, but he never spoke a word in his life. A nurse wrote that James did not laugh or cry, but stared at the trees as if listening to them whisper. On a full moon night, he carved 3 words into his pillow: Lenora. Elbridge. Return. After Lenora was arrested, the Elbridge house was cleared out. They found a cowhide-bound book, Mary Beth Elbridge's Ritual Diary, dating from 1871. More than a record of births and deaths, it was a teaching passed from mother to daughter. Each daughter must keep a child, a root, a sorrow. When they dug up the garden, they found wooden boxes hidden in tree trunks containing intact, mummified bodies, from infants to young women, their skin still soft, their hair still braided. Each box was engraved with a name and the word offered. Digging deep into the basement, they discovered a trapdoor that had been locked for more than 100 years. Opening it revealed an unusually cold room with glass jars containing hair bones and even the hands of infants on the shelves. A rosary made from baby teeth. In the middle was a dark-stained hickory table, a table for preserving bodies. A girl about 12 years old who had died in 1910 was still intact, as if she had just died with a note on her chest, "Bloodroot daughter." The tradition was passed down through the generations, but not everyone accepted it. Nora Elbridge, born in 1931, was one who refused. She was locked up for 3 days when she refused to be bathed in lamb's blood for her 14th-year-old ritual. In her secret diary, she wrote, "I will not make a grave for my sister." Nora ran away, changed her name and became a social worker to find and save the girls who were chosen to succeed her. In the 1970s, she discovered a girl named Anna who had the same signs. She sneaked into the Elbridge house and found evidence: wet dress, new bottles, the name Anna carved into the beam. Nora sent all the documents to a colleague, but the next morning she was hit by a car and killed near Elbridge's garden. The package disappeared. What do you think about the words womb, root, return? If one day you accidentally found those words in the woods near your house, what would you do? The parcel Nora sent was intercepted, never to be seen again. But something survived. Down in the basement, behind loose stones, there was a hidden iron box. Inside was Nora's second diary. The last page was written just hours before she died. They don't preserve bodies, they preserve obedience. But the rot always rises. And when it does, I hope someone will remember my name, Nora Elbridge, the one who said no. 15 years later, in 1989, a handyman named Royce Halter was hired to clear the brush at the edge of Elbridge's land, a job no one else would dare take. The land had been abandoned for decades. There were no houses, no trees, but the air was always heavy, as if the earth was still holding something back. That's where bad things grow, the locals said. Royce didn't believe in the haunted land, until his hoe blade made a cold, dry click. Beneath the dirt, a sealed iron box rusted but intact. He took it to the Gorman Hollow police station. Inside were a brown leather-bound notebook, 4 black and white photos from the 1970s, a lock of baby hair tied in a blue ribbon, a tattered welfare worker's ID card bearing the name N. Elbridge. The first page had shaky ink. This is the truth they can't bury. They called it the Elbridge Testament. In it, Nora recorded nearly 3 decades of rituals abuse secrets, names, dates, practices, and girls who had never been in school records but were preserved. Subsequent investigations confirmed that at least 9 children had gone missing between 1940 and 1975. Only one body was ever found, Anna Ray Cleven's 9, who had disappeared in 1976. Anna's body was in a clay pit, embalmed, wrapped in wax and linen. No coffin. Roots grew around her face like fingers. Cause of death? Never determined. Nora's diary repeated a sentence in red ink. They don't bury. They keep. There were pages with just that sentence covering the entire page. Investigators called it the preservation theory. And it was more than a metaphor. According to Nora, the Elbridges believed in a twisted commandment passed down orally from mother to daughter. Death is the dissolution of the disobedient. The obedient remain. If the body is sealed and the spirit is called, the body will be whole until judgment. The diary described the preservation table, the recipe for pure wax tallow herbs, crushed chalk ashes. Nora writes, they put dresses on the girls, combed their hair, prayed till morning, then closed their mouths, eyes, ears, not to keep them quiet, but to shut them out from the world. A note from May 12, 1968. They took Ruth, age 8. She knew the whole 23rd Psalm by heart, never asked a question, just smiled. Ruth's name matched a missing persons report from 1969. She disappeared near the creek behind Elbridge's garden. The last born in the family, Esther Elbridge, now in her 60s, lives under a protected identity. She spoke only once in a 2004 documentary that never aired. They say it's love, but love doesn't smell of vinegar and resin and wax. Love doesn't make you sleep next to your sister's glass eyes. The only recorded footage shows Esther sitting in a curtained room, her hands clasped together. Her voice is as soft as a breath. No tears, no trembling. But her silence was heavier than any words. The interviewer asked, "How did that night end?" Esther stared for a long moment, then said softly, "It didn't end. They just stopped calling it a ritual." She said that in late 1975 or early 1976, when she was about 9, a fateful evening took place at the Elbridge house. That day, her cousin May was chosen to finish. The room smelled of wax and cedar. Chalk circles were drawn on the wooden floor. Everyone was dressed in white barefoot. Nora stood silently behind, holding a Bible, faded to ash gray. Grandfather sat in a high chair, eyes closed, muttering something. May didn't cry. She just smiled at Esther and whispered, "Don't forget your song." Then she lay down on the long table. Esther's mother prayed in a language that wasn't English and wasn't quite Latin. Each member took turns kissing May's forehead and turning away. Only Esther refused. She stood there until her mother's hand pushed her aside. That night, Esther crept down into the cellar. May's body was gone. The smell of wax lingered, and in the corner behind a jar of ashes was a small red ribbon. Esther took it. Years later, in an interrogation, she confessed that she had kept the ribbon sealed in a glass jar hidden in the storeroom. It still smelled of church candles and vinegar. She also said that the ground in the yard was damp that day, even though it hadn't rained for days. It was as if something was seeping up from the ground. Esther never returned to Gorman Hollow. She said she still dreamed of May humming the old song. After Esther's confession, the police officially began digging in a mossy area at the end of the old farm, what the locals called the silent place. No animals grazed there, no wildflowers, just a grey carpet of grass that didn't wither or grow. But the dig was stopped before it could begin. In 2006, the Tennessee Department of Historic Preservation invoked an old clause in the 19th century land deed, a rare religious exemption protecting the site as a spiritual heritage site. Only living descendants of the Elbridges could authorize excavation, and Esther refused. Digging changes nothing. Don't wake sleeping things to prove they're dead. Still, investigators persisted. A ground-penetrating scanner revealed several child-sized hollow pits lined up in neat rows. No metal, no coffins, just black shadows in the ground. 6 months later, one pit had shifted, as if the thing inside was no longer there. And then rumors began to spread. People who came to the quiet lot heard soft singing, smelled wax or vinegar on the wind. A deputy said he saw a child's handprint on the back window of a car leaving the site. No children were anywhere near. In 2011, the Elbridge land was sold off as a parcel, but no one touched the quiet lot. The area remained fenced off with a faded wooden sign, "By order of heaven and the ancestors do not disturb." It was still there. No headstones, no excavations, and absolutely quiet. In 2017, Dr. Marion Coates, a Knoxville folklorist, published Blood in the Soil Ritual and Heritage in Appalachia. It received little scholarly attention, but in Gorman County, it caused a quiet panic. Coates spent a decade collecting records, accounts, all histories, all connected, however faintly, to the Elbridges. Her conclusion: the rituals never stopped. They just retreated deeper into the woods, into caves, into places no longer on the map. She identified at least 3 other communities scattered throughout the Smoky Mountains that were distantly related to Elbridge. The same pattern: high infant mortality rates, land titles with religious clauses, generations of isolation, no public cemetery. A site near Hollow Ridge had 4 child disappearances from 1993, 2004, all unsolved. The victims' families declined to be interviewed. A retired nurse who worked there said, "We weren't allowed to ask about them, especially the ones who were born small and weak. They disappeared before the following spring." Coates also found a series of photos taken by rangers in 1981. A cave, a handmade earthen altar, scorched rocks, melted candles. The markings on the cliffs were identical to the chalk circle Esther had described. Her research ended with a chilling hypothesis. She never gave the exact date, but said it was early autumn. The client insisted on no hospital, no paperwork, no birth certificate, just like the old days, she was told. Payment in cash, double her usual rate. The midwife described the location as an old timber farmhouse at the end of a 1-lane gravel road, miles from the nearest paved highway. When she arrived, there were 6 women already there, all dressed in white, all barefoot. None of them spoke directly to her, only to each other in what she swore wasn't English. The labor itself was unremarkable, she wrote, except for the smell, hot wax and brine that seemed to seep from the walls. The baby was delivered healthy crying, but within minutes one of the women took it from her arms and carried it out of the room. She followed protesting until another woman blocked the doorway and said simply, "Your work is done. The rest is ours." She was paid, escorted to her car, and told the road back to town. The only thing she took with her was the sheet she'd used to wrap the newborn. 2 days later, when she opened her laundry bag, she found a small knot tied into one corner of the fabric, and woven into that knot a single strand of black infant hair bound with a red thread. The post ended abruptly. No follow-up, no other activity from that account. In the months after, unconfirmed sightings trickled across rural West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. People reported a barefoot woman with long white hair standing on the ridge lines at dusk, always facing toward Gorman Hollow. Hunters claimed to hear humming deep in the pines, low and slow like a lullaby for someone far underground. And then in January 2024, a drone hobbyist filming the frozen hills near the Tennessee border captured something unexpected. On a barren slope above an abandoned mine entrance, footprints in the snow, small, evenly spaced in 2 perfect rows leading toward the tree line. The prints didn't sink the way human feet would. They lay flat on the surface as if whoever made them was lighter than the snow itself. No one has explained them. If you're watching this late at night, take a look around. Is there anyone standing outside your window? Just to be sure, the family, polite, quiet, devout, had been strict from the start. No questions asked, no paperwork, no outside contact. They paid in cash, but what the midwife saw haunted her forever. The baby wasn't meant for them. They called it the vessel for the sealed one. She left mid-sentence. A week later, a package showed up at the door. Inside was the missing stethoscope and a lock of the baby's jet black hair tied with a red ribbon. A month later, she moved to Michigan. What the Elbridge clan had started in the 19th century didn't die with Ruth or Nora or even Esther. It just changed new names, new practices, new careers. But the tradition remains: preserve the bloodline at all costs. In 2024, the Elbridge ancestral home has long been abandoned. No one in the area dares to set foot inside. But a drone enthusiast from Pennsylvania, fascinated by Appalachian ghost towns, decides to do what no one else dares: fly straight over the Elbridge ruins and down into the ground. He takes off from a vacant lot by the side of the road at dawn. At first the view is normal. The valley is covered in brambles. The old chimney rises like a tombstone. But then, the vault door. 2 warped wooden panels open a crack. Something has entered, or never left. The drone's light penetrates. The stone walls are still solid. A spiral staircase leads deep into the ground. At the bottom, not earth, but a round, cracked stone altar covered in ash and bone fragments. Surrounded by a bracelet burned into the floorboards, small like a child's. The drone lowers. There's movement under the stone. Not an animal. Not wind. Breath. A white stream escaped as if someone were breathing from below. Then, the signal was lost. The drone owner drove closer to connect, but about 50 feet away, all his equipment went dark. Car phone remote, no battery, just dead. He walked over, found the remote burned out. The drone smashed, and on a nearby tree, a single word carved into it: return. He didn't come back. He sold his stuff, deleted. His channel moved away. But the 3 minutes and 47 seconds of video that survived were still being shared online. In the final frame, if you pause at the right time, you'll see a small hand in the left corner from inside the lens. The story should have ended in the 1960s. But at Riverview Psychiatric Hospital, 90 miles from Elbridge Hollow, in a decaying archive, there was a strange set of papers. Admitted as a child, no relatives wandering near Elk Run. The boy's name was Jacob, about 11 years old, silent, thin, pale, with dirt on his fingernails. It wasn't the silence that caught the night nurse's attention, but the drawings. Jacob drew the same thing every day, a ramshackle cabin in the woods, a shadowy figure in the second-story window. And under each one was a symbol, an upside-down V, with a dot in the middle. As the social car drove Jacob through Elbridge, he jumped up and shouted someone's name, Mara. Back at the hospital, Jacob whispered, "She's in the dark. She walks backwards and lives behind the rock. She looks over the wall where you sleep." When asked who Mara was, he said only, "My family locked her up there." 2 years later, Jacob died of respiratory complications. There was no autopsy, but the final words in the doctor's notes, in the last days, the patient repeated, "It's in our bones. No more sleep." Said that Mara was standing outside the window watching. The earth would not stop her this time. Years later, a nurse who had cared for Jacob wrote a memoir. In it, she recounted the quiet evening when Jacob gave her the last drawing. Dear friends, the Elbridge family story never ends. It doesn't die. It scatters like spores on the wind. But before this mystery could be revealed, something strange happened. In late 2018, Dr. Coates, who was pursuing research into this family line, suddenly disappeared. Her partner reported to the police that her car was found near the border of a national park. Inside was a laptop, a sealed envelope with the words, "Open only if I disappear," and a red ribbon tied to a child's hair. The contents of the envelope have never been made public. The disappearance was ruled unexplained, but many believe that she did not disappear because she was chasing a legend, but because she touched something that was still alive. Next, we return to Esther Elbridge and her final interview in 2019. Esther was 86 years old, her hair white, her voice still sharp but with the reserve of a lifetime of silence. She rarely gave interviews, never revealed her real name. But this time was different. The recording, later leaked to an Appalachian oral history archive, opens with the question, "Why now, Esther? Why speak up after all these years?" Her answer is chilling. "Because the land remembers, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't." For the next 43 minutes, Esther recounts her voice trembling, the names she once swore she would never mention. Sarah Elbridge, Nora, Ruth Jeremiah. She confirms what has long been suspected: the preservation ritual is real. She's seen it. She saw a preserved person. When asked, "What does it look like?" Esther whispered, "It doesn't look like a corpse. What I remember most is it's like it's still waiting." She said she left the farm in 1955, changed her name, moved to Ohio, but the dreams never stopped. She still saw the Ruth cellar, still heard Ruth praying over that thing, still smelled the salt and ashes. Then Esther received a letter with no address, no signature. Inside was only one sentence written in her mother's handwriting: "The bloodline is not over. And wrapped in tissue paper was a lock of a baby's jet black hair tied with a red ribbon. Her last words in the interview: "They don't need mountains anymore. No cellar or salt, just a willing womb." And that thing is easier to find than you think. 3 weeks later, Esther disappeared. There was no sign of forced entry, no disturbance. Some said she was taken away. Some said she came back on her own. But no matter what, the blood flowed. After that, rumors spread quickly through the small towns of Appalachia. Older people reported hearing whispers, not from people, but from the woods, from the wells, from the ground. Some swore they saw a woman who looked exactly like Ruth Elbridge, walking barefoot by a dry creek after dark. But then a more chilling truth emerged. In 2021, an archivist in Kentucky digitized a box of 19th century birth records. They contained hundreds of normal birth records, except for 8 all with the last name Elbridge that took place in the 1970s and 1980s. No hospitals, no doctors, no death certificates, no school registrations, no social security numbers. These children existed only on paper, then disappeared. Each file was accompanied by an identical note, preserved by tradition, name withheld at mother's request. The government called it a filing error, but a leaked internal memo said otherwise. This record is intentional. Links land to area once owned by the Elbridge family. Multi-generational ritual may still be in progress. High-level investigation recommended. The memo was buried within weeks. The whistleblower was fired, left the state, and never spoke again. Where are you listening? At home? In a dark room? In a car on a nighttime road? What time is it where you are? I just want to know. Because this story could be scarier if you heard it at the right time. Because in 2023, a midwife in rural West Virginia says she was hired to deliver a baby in secret. No paperwork, no questions, no outsiders. The family said the child wasn't meant for them. They called it a vessel for the sealed one. Unlike the others, this carving didn't show the Elbridge house. It showed bones tangled, wrapped in roots that grew downward instead of up. In the center, that same symbol we've seen before, and a black figure beneath the earth, arms outstretched. And now, we return to 1892. To the journal of Asa Elbridge, the family's last living male heir, and to what he buried before disappearing forever. In the spring of 1892, Asa wrote a journal no one was ever meant to read. It wouldn't be found until 1978, discovered by a demolition crew clearing what little remained of the Elbridge family chapel. The place was more roots than stone, now half swallowed by the hillside. Behind a false wall in a rusted tin box, they found it. Somehow it had survived fire moisture and decades underground. The handwriting was shaky, either from fear or something worse. I write this in fear, not of man, but of what we kept alive for too long. Asa confessed that the Elbridges believed their blood was untouchable, preserved by what they called a covenant of earth. This wasn't worship. It wasn't devotion. It was incest. It was containment. The children weren't raised. They were planted. Buried alive in soil for hours, mouths filled with ash and roots until they could hear her properly. Her name was Mara. Sometimes Asa called her a goddess, sometimes a curse. He claimed she'd been born human centuries earlier, abandoned in this valley. A child left for dead, who rose from the soil when the rains failed. When they tried to burn her, she didn't scream. She smiled. Pause here, audience. I know this is getting dark, but tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? I'm curious who's hearing Mara's story in the middle of the night. Asa wrote that the land was never theirs. It had always been hers, and the only way to keep her sleeping was through Elbridge blood, generation after generation, feeding her through union death and silence. But Asa refused. I saw what was left of Mary. Her eyes were not eyes. She had no mouth. But I heard her say, "You kept me too long." The roots came through her fingers. She never bled. He vowed never to lie with his kin, to burn the bones of the children, to bury himself far from the hollow. No grave was ever found. Just a single boot in 1947, still laced, still holding a shin bone, burned black. By 1904, the Elbridge line had nearly died out, not by chance, but because Asa refused to cede it. But there was one left. Naomi Elbridge. She didn't break the pact. She had a child. No father was ever named. The clerk's book simply recorded infant male born of Naomi Elbridge. Eyes black, no cry. Locals whispered the baby wasn't right. Grey skin, eyes that never blinked. A midwife. Mrs. Harland refused to talk about the birth until her death in 1933. But in her diary, she wrote, that child was not born. It came up. Naomi raised the boy Hiram, hidden from the outside world. But by 1912, the hollow was sick again. Travelers said the trees moved wrong. A nearby farm found a perfect ring of children's teeth laid in their field. Naomi knew what she had to do. Following her grandmother's rites, she prepared the offering. But this time, it wasn't a stranger. It was her son. At just 8 years old, Hiram was led into the family chapel. Naomi brought a bundle of ash, a cloth soaked in her blood, a locket with a curl of Mara's hair. In blood, through ash beneath bone. In silence, not birth, we return her home. Hiram was buried alive beneath the floorboards. A single candle burned above him, steady, never flickering. Even decades later, when the chapel collapsed, locals swore the faint scent of burnt sugar lingered. They called it Sweet Hollow. Nothing grew there again, and now we return to that hollow because something buried there is still alive.